Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stelios Birakis. I'm tax principal, head of R&D and government incentives, Deloitte Greece, and with me is Mr. Yannis Antonopoulos, tax, customs and incentives director at Mytilineos Group. And the topic of our discussion pertains to the Recovery Fund. It is obviously the topic of the day. The Recovery and Resilience Fund, Greece 2.0, or the RRF as we call it, is the topic of our discussion since it has created a lot of expectations for opportunities, but at the same time, apprehensions. The RRF constitutes the biggest support program in Europe with 100% union funds and funding stemming from the markets and not from the member states themselves. It is extraordinary due to the nature of the problem of COVID-19. It is upfront program, which means that by the end of 2022, 70% of these resources will have to be committed, whereas up to 2025, it is necessary to complete the payments. It places particular attention to green transition. 20% of the fund will be dedicated to digital transition. It will create jobs through targeted investments and reforms. Of course, all this means that it is an unprecedented tool that will create the possibility and a huge opportunity for the growth of the economy and of the society, as long as the objectives are met, of course. And of course, the topic of today's discussion are the challenges that we need to overcome in order to reach these objectives. The 30.5 billion euros of RRF are combined with the resources of NSRF, of the Public Investments Program, as well as of the other European program funds that are available to Greece, and to create an unprecedented availability of state resources that may exceed 100 billion euros by the end of the decade. Yannis, the question that many people ask is, we have the know-how, we have the possibility and the mechanisms for the fast absorption of these resources. Stelios, truly, it is an unprecedented program. It has never been met in the past. Many compare it to the Marshall Plan that followed the Second World War. In my view, they are absolutely right, especially when it comes to a country like Greece that is now overcoming a multi-year crisis, as it is in the midst of a crisis, just like the other countries of the world. It is absolutely necessary for the investments to be made to have access to this program. We should not forget that our country is at a very low place when it comes to the investment index compared to GDP, and also when it comes to the index of attracting investments. So it is even more important for us, for obvious reasons, since we will have investments that will create prosperity and revenues. So it is absolutely necessary for us, this program. Now, with regard to your question, which is at the same time the biggest bet that we need to win. I am convinced that the big businesses can absorb the funds to which they are entitled. The point is that the RRF and SRF program with regard to big enterprises correspond to 20%. The rest pertain to public investments and private investments made by small, medium enterprises. Of course, this doesn't mean that the big enterprises cannot support these investments by undertaking major infrastructure projects through PPPs and concessions. They can implement plans of small, medium enterprises, especially in the fields of green economy and digital transition. Yes, you are right. Green and digital transition. RRF, being part of the Next Generation EU, requires the member states to make sure that the reforms and the resources will abide by the European policies, especially with regard to the significant harm principle of EU taxonomy, as well as the compatibility with the rules of state subsidies. Do you believe that the Greek enterprises are in the position to develop a sustainable investment, harmonizing themselves with the priorities set by the European Union? As I said, I believe the big enterprises can do that. Mytilineos Group, for example, in the 3 years 2018-2020, made investments that exceeded 600 million euros. And this, mind you, before the announcement of RRF on NSRF. So I'm convinced that the big enterprises have a plan and they can make investments. The point is, what happens with the public investments? What happens with the small, medium enterprises? Now, with regard to the public, we should take into account the performance of the state with regard to the absorption of smaller funds. Of course, it could have done better, but okay. The truth is that Greece 2.0 is a program in the right direction. And in the context of that program, there have been work groups formed in the Ministry of Finance that will be responsible for the coordination of the effort. However, what is also needed is deep reforms. And I would like to mention what Mr. Skylakakis said. He once talked about revolution in the public sector, and I agree with him. Revolution in terms of times, because times are always very demanding, and also revolution in terms of efficiency and performance. Now, earlier you talked about taxonomy, about the guidelines of the European Union. RRF, in relation to NSRF, will be used in order for us to change the production model. And so will do many of the other countries of the European Union. Countries that were depending on one or two sectors. For example, Greece is highly dependent on tourism and needs a change of the production model, because with programs aimed at combating climate change, which is a reality, energy efficiency, energy performance, modern farming, creation of high added value that will lead to an increase of revenues, will create jobs. All these are a major opportunity that we have in front of us, an opportunity that we should not miss. Always, of course, taking into account the guidelines of the European Union. Our company, our group, Mytilineos Group, has committed to zero emissions by 2030 in the fields of RES storage and sustainable development projects, and of course in the sectors of metallurgy. I'll give you an example. We will abide by the rules for pension set by the European Union. Okay, the RRF stipulates that the state subsidy rules will prevail, which we know are limited when it comes to big enterprises operating in member states. At the same time, we know that in the context of the program Greece 2.0, the loans provided by RRF constitute the tool that the government wishes to use in order to support the businesses. We know that the Ministry of Finance is approaching this tool as an innovative tool, since it provides guarantees to banks, but at the same time funds. These are financed by the banks in order to be given to businesses and for them to implement projects. The Ministry of Finance has set as an objective to equalize the interest rate in Greece with the European average in order to boost investments. Have you taken into account these incentives? Do you expect to get a substantial state subsidy that will allow a faster implementation of your plans? First of all, Mytilineos is always operating within the pillar of RRF, green economy, energy, industry. At the same time, it creates and preserves stable jobs and has the possibility to provide its own capital, which, in combination with the state subsidies and loans, make an important amount to be used in investments. I can tell you that we are in the position to do that. If you allow me, I want to tell you that GAC expired last year, and you know that the GAC pertained to big investment projects. However, the map for investment support that will be in that will come into force as of 2022 will be effective in all regions apart from Attica. Now, with regard to loans, we have the experience of Greek businesses that are used to getting state subsidies, tax reliefs, tax exemptions. They're not so familiar with the loans, and now the loans will change the game. Do you believe that they will change the mentality of the Greek businesses and make them use loans in order to make investments? Because the objective is to get the 12 billion of loans from the RRF and turn them into 30 billion of return on investment. This is not only the mentality of the businesses. It has to do with their capacity. We talked about taxonomy. We talked about the European criteria earlier. And mind you, there's going to be some credit criteria provided by the banks. So the point is, how many Greek businesses actually meet all these criteria? And the second and most important thing, the businesses that will submit investment plans, will they do so in a sustainable way? In other words, the investment plans will be sustainable. Will they be in the position to pay back the loans that they will get? Loans are absolutely necessary for Greek businesses. Don't forget that during the last few years, Greek businesses get loans at a cost that is far greater compared to the cost that the competitors pay in other European member states. So the good thing is that the RRF provides low interest rate, but I repeat, to those companies that will meet the criteria. It is an important point to highlight, yes. And we should also talk about the reference interest rate. In other words, there is this rationale that an interest rate may be given at a reference price that is quite low. It's not state subsidy per se, but it's quite low. And this is something that the businesses need to take into account if it allows them to get loans at this interest rate. Now, let's talk about the national dimension of RRF. It is obvious that the recession caused by the pandemic, as well as the need of the economy to turn to the environmental and digital direction set by the European Union, make the success of the program absolutely necessary. We should not forget that these are loans. In other words, the state will borrow this money, and if it doesn't make the most of this money, it has to give it back. Could you tell us which are the reasons that make the exploitation of these funds necessary, apart from the ones we have already mentioned, and which are very important since they have to do with investment, with the change of production model, the creation of a more extrovert production model of the country? There are going to be some important effects on other sectors. For example, the liquidity of the country and the fiscal measures which will eventually be taken. Why? I remind you that 2022 will be a very crucial year. It will be the year when the Stability Pact will be revised. It will be a year when the extraordinary liquidity plan will expire, which means that Greece will have to make do in order to remain competitive and attract investments. This means that success is of utmost importance, both for liquidity and sustainability of debt, which will reach 350 billion in 2021 and 450 in 2022. So if we don't succeed, then we will have to take measures. I didn't want to use this word, but the truth is that we will have to take measures. Okay, but if you had to use 3 words in order to describe on what the success of RRF will be based, which these 3 words would be? First of all, a relation of mutual trust between government, wider public administration, businesses. This is absolutely necessary. There has to be cooperation. We are alone in this. It is a national objective, and we need to reach this objective. And not only in order to absorb the funds. This is not the utmost objective. The utmost objective is to have the proper investment plan and bring revenues, create jobs. Words, I could say. Okay, there is one that I didn't want to use, but it is the word alarm. I hope that we won't use it a lot in the coming 5 years. We need to succeed. The second word is a positive word. My grandfather used to say it. He was a fisherman, then he was a builder, then he fought the Germans. Anyway, he used to say, agada, low, take it slowly, which means if you are under pressure, you need to find the strength to react, to defend yourself, and then slowly but steadily change the situation, get momentum, and reach your objectives, get results. Yes, something like Euro 2004, Eurobasket 2005, and Eurovision. We had won the Eurovision back then. The RRF of 2027, no, Eurovision 27. That's all we could discuss about during the time given to us. Thank you very much.